7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty.
I guess I really don't know what Christmas is all about. Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about? Sure, Charlie Brown. I can tell you what Christmas is all about.
You tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Hello, this is Michael Hart of the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. This is our edition of Unknown America, myths and little-known oddities about the greatest nation on earth, part of the Unknown America Project, and frankly, a lot of other projects as well. For those of you that are brand new to the program, that are brand new to Heart of America, we come to you live every single Monday through Friday, beginning at 8 a.m., Some days we encourage callers. Other days we just get deep in the weeds and informational, and this is one of those days. On our Friday broadcast, we always do situational security awareness, keeping you and your family and friends and your community safe. Wednesdays are our Unknown America edition, and I find it to be quite apropos that the very first broadcast of our second season and the first broadcast of 2019 is, in fact, on some of the most interesting and curious Unknown America. The reason for the Unknown America Project, for those of you that are not aware, are just simply the fact that so much of what people think they know about this nation is just so patently incorrect. It was George Santayana that made it quite clear many years ago that those that forget the past are indeed condemned to repeat it. So we have put together this broadcast each and every week, and probably, frankly, going to expand that out to two, for the purposes of educating people on some of the things about this country that they just simply did not know. And if you don't know the past of this nation, then understanding what's going on in the world around you today is just this side of impossible. So some days we get into some just mindless trivia and oddities about the United States of America. Other days we go a little more long form just to give you some insights into what is going on. Today we're going to be talking about the confrontation that was almost started over a tree. And the reason that I wanted to get into this today, because it really looks back in history, and if you don't understand some of the things that have occurred in this nation, then what's going on in the news today seems overwhelmingly troubling in a lot of senses. 40 years ago, there was a potential flashpoint that could have reignited the Korean War all over again. And today we find ourselves in very similar territory, as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has doggedly pursued his nuclear program, threatening the United States and its allies in the region. Kim Jong-un is begging for war with his missile programs. The former ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley in particularly, had many verbal dust-ups with Un. She'd said during an emergency meeting of the Security Council, as the Trump administration at that time was pondering how to handle the authoritarian Kim regime. Of course, we have heard about the stories of Trump traveling abroad and shaking little Kim's hand and the supposed détente that had occurred. All these things look quite wonderful, quite encouraging. But unless you look at them and you see the prism of history, which is the way I prefer to phrase this, breaking down the news of the day through the prism of the past, then some of the things that you're seeing going on with the North Koreans today, they look as though they are more encouraging than they probably are. It was on August 19th, 1976. This is the day after the Republican Party nominated President Gerald Ford as its candidate in the upcoming presidential election against Jimmy Carter. That day, the following day, readers of the New York Times awoke to the following headline on the front page: 2 Americans slain by North Koreans in clash at DMZ. According to the Times, a group of North Korean People's Armies, or KPA soldiers, with axes and knives, had attacked a group of American and South Korean soldiers and civilian workers in the DMZ. This is the area separating the two Koreas, who you have to remember there was a truce, but there was not a full-fledged surrender, and there still is not a full-fledged surrender. The Korean War, in a technical sense, is still going on. But anyway, the area was separating the two Koreas, and there was the killing of 2 U.S. soldiers and the wounding of 5 South Korean troops as well. In addition to the story in the article was a very, very grainy photo taken by a U.S. soldier who had observed the incident from a nearby guard post. Following the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Vietnam the year before, the DMZ was the only place in Asia where American combat troops directly confronted communist forces. It had also been the site of numerous other attacks by soldiers of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un's grandfather. Still, as the Times reported, even, this is a quote, by the level of past provocations, yesterday's attack appeared unusually brutal. And it was. 2 American officers on a pre-agreed mission to trim a tree, blocking the view of the U.S.-South Korean unit that patrolled the Joint Security Area, a heavily guarded area in the center of the DMZ, had been murdered in broad daylight by North Korean troops in a clearly premeditated attack. To the Western world, the killing of Captain Arthur Boniface and Lieutenant Mark Barrett in what would soon be known as the Axe murder incident seemed to epitomize the contempt of the Pyongyang regime for the United States, and its indifference to human life was on full display. It appeared as though Kim Il-sung was actually begging for war. In 1976, President Gerald Ford's decisive and forceful reaction succeeded in intimidating the Pyongyang regime without escalating a low-intensity conflict between the North Koreans and the U.S. And there was fear that there would be a full-scale war. Ford did manage to flex America's military might, though launching one of the strongest shows of combined U.S. land, air, naval, and special operations forces in peacetime history. The president, working in close conjunction with South Korean allies, went to DEFCON 3, the third highest state of military readiness. And it worked. It was called Operation Paul Bunyan, as the carefully calibrated shock and awe American response may very well have been President Ford's finest yet forgotten hour. He was known as the guy that would, fall down walking over to Air Force One, juggling around on the golf course, and just basically a bumbler. But this would have been Ford's more or less missiles of October type of mission. He was very gutsy and shrewd in launching Operation Paul Bunyan, according to Douglas Brinkley, who is a historian and political commentator and author of a 2007 biography of Ford. Operating in DEFCON 3 mode, Ford ably flexed American military might over the death of the 2 U.S. soldiers. No less important, observes Brinkley, Washington kept South Korea involved in the operation all the way. To top it off, Kim Il-sung wound up issuing a statement of regret, and it was the last time an American soldier would die in combat in Korea. And to think it all began with a tree. 23 years after the armistice had ended the conflict between North and South Korea, the peninsula was still in a virtual state of war. So many violent incidents has taken place in and around the DMZ, which was patrolled by both North Korean soldiers and a UN force made of U.S. and South Korean troops, that the entire area had actually, despite its moniker, been designated a combat zone. All told, nearly 50 Americans had died in these skirmishes in the DMZ. The vast majority of them instigated by the North Koreans, along with a total of more than 1,000 Koreans on both sides who had perished. The worst rash of incidents took place in the late 1960s, a period also known as the Second Korean War, when Pyongyang was engaged in a two-pronged campaign designed to decapitate the South Korean government, who was led by Park Chung-hee, and to undermine South Korea's alliance with the U.S. by spoiling attacks and ambushes of various kinds against the United Nations troops. These attacks had continued into the 1970s, only several months before the axe murder incident. A U.S. officer had been kidnapped in the DMZ by the KPA members, before a security detail was able to rescue him. The 550-yard-long joint security area was often the center of the skirmishing, also referred to as Pyongyang, after nearly the former village where the truce that had concluded the Korean War, had been signed in 1953. Now, the Joint Security Area was the only area in the DMZ where both the UN and KPA troops enjoyed the freedom of movement. It was at the time of the axe murder incident where 160 Americans and 75 South Korean soldiers were assigned to the elite UN Joint Security Command that guarded the JSA. All volunteers, the troops were specifically picked for their cool tempers and their robust figures. They carried 45 cows, when they were allowed to, that is, and they inter-patrolled the area, was governed by strict rules about how many soldiers could carry weapons at any one given time. In August of 1976, the UN command in Seoul decided that a poplar tree in the JSA had grown too tall and was blocking the view between two vital UN guard posts, making it difficult for the UN soldiers to protect themselves from North Korean attacks. After the United Nations Command cleared the project with its North Korean counterpart, Korean civil service personnel entered the JSA, escorted by United Nations troops, to begin trimming the tree. But at this particular juncture, the group had to stop the work because of unexpected rain. A few days later, on August 18th, as the 1976 Republican National Convention in Kansas City was going about the business of nominating Gerald Ford as its presidential candidate, the tree trimming work began. That morning, a squad of 5 Korean civil service personnel re-entered the JSA, accompanied by a 13-man UNJSC team led by U.S. Army Captain Arthur Boniface of Newburgh, New York, and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett of Columbia, South Carolina. Because of JSA rules restricting the number of JSC personnel permitted to wear sidearms, neither Boniface nor Barrett was armed. This is perhaps because the operation had been properly arranged with the North Koreans, so they obviously did not expect any trouble. They were wrong. Once the trimming began, 15 North Korean soldiers appeared, led by one Lieutenant Pak, who was a KPA officer who had been involved in earlier confrontations, primarily in the DMZ. After observing the work for 15 minutes, Lieutenant Pak suddenly ordered the Korean service personnel to halt their work. According to Pak, and you always had to refer to him, or any of them for that matter, with some kind of magnificent, benevolent prefix to the mentioning of their name, which you always had to say in full. So, according to Pak, the great leader, Kim Il-sung, himself had planted the tree. So now it was untouchable. So I guess just years earlier, wandering in the wilderness, a lofty way from home, out of nowhere, here comes little Kim to just randomly plant a tree. A single tree. A single poplar tree in the middle of nowhere. I don't know if this is where Theodore Geisel, a.k.a. Dr. Seuss, got the inspiration for the book The Lorax, but perhaps it is. Boniface, who had already heard his share of KPA saber rattling during the course of his tour in the area, ignored Pak's injunction and ordered the detail to continue with the tree trimming mission. Unfortunately, this time Boniface had misjudged his adversary, and within minutes a KPA truck appeared, and approximately 20 KPA troops emerged wielding crowbars and clubs. After Pak reportedly gave the order to kill the Americans, the KPA platoon set upon the trimmers and their security escort with special attention to the 2 American officers. Pak himself struck Boniface, knocking him down. Then 5 of his men finished him off. With knives and axes. Still in shock, the JSC unit quickly disengaged, retrieved the body of Boniface, and returned to its barracks. Unfortunately, in the rush to disengage with the KPA troops, the rest of the JSC detail overlooked Barrett. Barrett had dived into a nearby ditch where he was quickly discovered by KPA troops and attacked at a more leisurely pace over the course of an hour. By the time his comrades had realized their mistakes and organized a rescue party, it was too late for him. He died en route to the hospital. The incident had been filmed as per standard JSC procedure, by which all operations in the JSA were recorded. However, the bad quality of the film made it very difficult to actually pinpoint who was killing whom, so the North Korean regime decided to spin the melee. 4 hours after the attack, Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung's son, Kim Jong-un would be Kim Jong-il is the father of Kim Jong-un, so this is Un's father, addressed the Conference of Non-Aligned Nations in Colombo, Sri Lanka. And in a brazen statement, he painted the melee as having been instigated by the U.S. and called upon the participants to endorse the withdrawal of U.S. forces and United Nations commands from Korea. Cuba seconded the statement, and it passed. And that, the Kim regime probably thought was it. A year after America's embarrassing evacuation from Vietnam, they thought that perhaps the wounded American imperialist tiger, Ford, would decide to withdraw from Korea as well. At worst, Kim calculated that Ford, who was still smarting from the criticism surrounding the rescue of a U.S. merchant ship the year before, in which 40 Marines had been killed or missing in action, would issue a statement of protest. But none was forthcoming. And so this particular incident has been buried in history. It almost caused a full-scale breakout of the Korean War all over again, and yet again is instrumental in educating the current generations in this country about the relationship between the United States and North Korea. These events have gone unreported so many times over the years. But if you look at the tree-cutting event in North Korea and you bring it forward now to the year 2019 and superimpose it over the relationship between North Korea and the United States of America, things that are going on in the world around us and the news around us today become a little more, if not understandable, at least clearer in their origin. We're going to take a real quick break and reset, and we're going to change direction, join you just a little bit on the other side on this edition of Unknown America, brought to you in part by Liberty One Tech and our friends at the Land Report and the Heart of America Broadcasting Network and the Unknown America Project. But we come back to the other side. I want to talk to you a little bit about something that you're probably not aware of that's not necessarily exclusively American, but something as we branch off into a brand new year, and we've just completed our Christmas celebrations throughout much of the world, a story that's heart-rendering and touching and hopefully inspiring for the coming year, no matter what your political stripe is. You're listening to Unknown America right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. Stick around. We're coming right back after a very short break. The Land Report, the magazine for the American landowner, is a proud supporter of the Michael Hart Show. Currently, they're offering an exclusive subscription price for listeners of the Michael Hart Show. So click on the subscribe button on landreport.com and enter the code HARTSHOW at checkout and receive a one-year discount on America's #1 land magazine. You'll get a full year of the Land Report, which normally goes for $59, for only $15. That's a 75% savings off the cover price. Again, that's promo code HARTSHOW at checkout of thelandreport.com, and make sure to check out the Land Report on Facebook if you love land. If you're a fan of the Michael Hart Show and are enjoying the daily commentary, interviews, and audio shorts, then please consider supporting the program financially. Creating a daily talk program takes a great deal of time and money. Although corporate sponsors are always welcome, the real support comes from people like you, the regular listeners. So if you support the Christian conservative message and values we share on this program and would like to help, please go to our website, michaelhartshow.com, and click on the orange Patreon button at the top of the page. For less than $7 a month, you can help us keep going while we spread our faith-based conservative views worldwide. So if you support our views, please consider supporting the program. Just go to www.michaelhartshow.com and click on the orange Patreon button, and thanks for your support and for listening.
I really can't stay.
Okay, you're free to go.
I've got to go away.
Understood, no means no.
This evening has been
Super appropriate.
so very nice.
But I do understand
My mother
consent.
will start to worry.
Definitely text her right
And
now.
I will be pacing the floor.
Here's the code and there is the
so really
door.
I'd better scurry.
I am gonna stand over
Now maybe
here.
just a half
Hey, welcome back. You're listening to Unknown America right here on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network, brought to you in part by the Unknown America Project, Heart of America, and our friends over at Liberty One Tech. You can find out more about them by going to liberty1tech.com, and they have got just an enormously wide range of services for all of your online and computing needs. So go check them out and thank them for supporting us here at the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. History is a very odd mistress. And there's a lot of things in the past of this nation and this world that are just ignored, overlooked, revised, deemed not worthy of telling. But, you know, if you look at the tree trimming story and you bring that story forward 4 decades, then what's going on in the world around us today, at least as it relates to U.S.-Korean relationships, make a whole lot more sense. It doesn't make it any more logical. It just makes it more understandable. That's the whole premise of this program. And I don't just mean Unknown America. I mean everything we put out, whether it's the Heart of America or it's the Michael Hart Show, because it changes almost every single day as far as the depth that we cover. The title of the program for any given day is kind of an indicator as to how deep into history we're going to go. That said, if you don't take the time to really research or just, casually read about American history or world history, then, wow, this whole world seems quite scary. And I'm not going to suggest that picking up a history book is going to ease all of your concerns, but it does make it a little bit more, again, understandable. It's also important to realize that a good portion of the history of this country, in our textbooks in particular, are published and or written in Europe. Over the course of the last several weeks, as I was celebrating the holidays with my children, one of the gifts that my kids know me so well, and one of the gifts that they gave me was a stack of 101 history cards. It's a trivia game. And I love that kind of stuff. And frankly, it's the kind of stuff that, you can learn an awful lot from if you got the right history cards. So I'm playing around with them, looking through them one day. Actually, I'm looking for show prep, just some ideas to talk about. And I realized that there was 3 or 4 of these American history trivia questions that the answers were not necessarily wrong entirely, but wrong. Just wrong. And I don't mean dates or years. I mean participants, programs, philosophies, personnel. It wasn't all through the deck. It probably only happened 4 or 5 times. But they were historical trivia. And the funny thing is, I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, here I am, a historian, and I might have failed this particular history game because the people that wrote it are wrong. And just my curiosity just kind of spurred out of that. And I looked and turned the box over. And yeah, lo and behold, it was printed in England. And I'm not even kidding. There's so much in this world that goes on that never gets reported or it gets underreported. And a lot of the things that get underreported are the stories of hope and inspiration. The stories that give us pause or reason to be optimistic about the future. I'm not talking about the boy rescuing puppies from the river kind of stories. I'm talking about the stories that speak to human nature. One such story is not necessarily, and is definitely not exclusively, American. But considering Americans' involvement, I felt it appropriate, particularly when you consider the time of the year that we are in, hopefully a time of the year that gives us pause and reflection and reason for optimism, patience, grace, love, acceptance, you name it. This is a European history story, but it's a story that had American involvement. And again, considering the time of the year, I felt it very appropriate to share with you. And it's the story of the World War I Christmas truce. Even from the distance of a century, no war seems more terrible than World War I. In the 4 years between 1914 and 1918, it killed or wounded more than 25 million people, and for a less apparent purpose than did any other war before or since. Yet there were still some odd moments of joy and hope in the trenches of Flanders and France, and one of the most remarkable came during the first Christmas of the war, a few brief hours during which men from both sides on the Western Front laid down their arms, emerged from their trenches, shared food, games, and comradeship. Their truce, the famous Christmas truce, was unofficial. Many officers disapproved, and headquarters on both sides took strong steps to ensure that it would never happen again. While it lasted, though, this truce was pretty magical, leading even the Wall Street Journal to observe, quote, "What appears from the winter fog and misery is a Christmas story, a fine Christmas story that is, in truth, the most faded and tattered of adjectives, inspiring." The first signs that something strange was happening occurred on Christmas Eve at 8:30 p.m. An officer of the Royal Irish Rifles reported to headquarters, quote, "Germans have illuminated their trenches, are singing songs and wishing us Happy Christmas. Compliments are being exchanged, but am nevertheless taking all military precautions." Further along the line, the two sides serenaded each other with Christmas carols, such as Silent Night from the German side, being met with the first Noel by British troops. The war diary of one soldier records that a certain Private Merker met a German patrol. This was a British soldier, obviously, and given a glass of whiskey and some cigars, and a message was sent back to the other side saying that if we did not fire at them, they would not fire at us. The same basic understanding seems to have sprung up spontaneously at other spots. Another British soldier, a Private Frederick Heath, said the truth began the same night when all down our line, this is a quote from his diary, our line of trenches, there came to our ears a greeting unique in war. English soldier, a Merry Christmas, a Merry Christmas. Then, as Private Heath wrote home in a letter, quote, "Come out, English soldier, come out here to us. For some little time we were cautious and did not even answer. Officers, fearing treachery, ordered the men to be silent, but up and down our line, one heard the men answering the Christmas greeting from the enemy. How could we resist wishing each other a Merry Christmas, even though we might be at each other's throats? So we kept running the conversation with the Germans, all the while our hands ready on our rifles. Blood and peace, enmity and fraternity, war's most amazing paradox. The night wore on to dawn, a night made easier by songs from the German trenches, the pipings of piccolos, and from our broad lines, laughter and Christmas carols. Not a shot was fired. Several factors contributed to combine to produce the conditions for the Christmas truce. By December of 1914, the men in the trenches were veterans. familiar enough with the realities of combat to have lost much of the idealism they had carried into war. Most longed for an end to bloodshed. There's a lot to be learned from that particular observation. Familiar enough with the realities of combat to have lost much of the idealism that they carried into war. There's a lot of lesson to be learned there for today's political discourse in the United States, particularly when it comes to the rhetoric that so overwhelmingly populates our airwaves. The war they had believed would be over by Christmas, yet here we are in Christmas week, still muddied, cold, and in battle. Then on Christmas Eve itself, several weeks of mild but miserably soaking weather gave way to a sudden hard frost, creating a dusting of ice and snow along the front that made the men on both sides feel that something spiritual was taking place. Just how widespread the truce was is hard to say. It was certainly not general. There were plenty of accounts of fighting continuing through the Christmas season in many of the sectors, and others of men fraternizing to the sounds of guns firing nearby. One common factor seems to be that Saxon troops, universally regarded as easygoing, were the most likely to be involved and have made the first approaches to their British counterparts. One soldier shouted across no man's land, "We are Saxons. Are you Anglo-Saxons? What is there for us to fight about?" The most detailed estimate, made by a fellow by the name of Malcolm Brown of Britain's Imperial War Museums, is that the truce extended at least two-thirds of the British-held trenches and the lines that actually ran through southern Belgium. Now, the truce was the suspension of hostilities only between the British and the Germans. The Russians on the Eastern Front still actually adhered to the old Julian calendar in 1914 and hence did not celebrate Christmas until January 7th, while the French were far more sensitive than their allies to the fact that the Germans were occupying about a third of France and ruling French civilians with a great deal of harshness. It was only in the British sector then that troops noticed at dawn the Germans had placed a small Christmas tree, actually several of them, along parapets of their trenches. Slowly, parties of men from both sides began to venture towards the barbed wire that separated them. One rifleman, a guy by the name of Oswald Tilley, wrote in a letter home to his mom and dad, literally hundreds of each side were out in no man's land shaking hands. Communication was in fact difficult. British troops were scarce. Many Germans had been employed in Britain before the war, frequently in restaurants. One officer with the Royal Welch found himself occupying a trench opposite the ruins of a heavily shelled brewery, wrote in his diary, quote, "One Saxon who spoke excellent English and who used to climb in some eyrie in the brewery and spend his time asking, how is London getting on?" And so lots of our men had blind spots, at which he laughed. One night I came out and called, "Who the hell are you?" And one came back the answer, "Ah, the officer. I expect I know you." We've often heard stories during the United States Civil War of brothers taking arms against brothers, but in fact it happened in World War I as well, particularly as it relates to the Brits and the Germans. There was a lot of reports of sporting events. One of the most detailed stories comes from the German side and reports that the 133rd Royal Saxon Regiment played a game against Scottish troops. According to the 133rd's war history, this match emerged from the, quote, droll scene of Tommy and Fritz chasing hares that emerged, they're talking about rabbits, that emerged from under cabbages between the lines, and then producing a ball to kick about. Eventually, this developed into a regulation football match with caps casually laid out as goals. The frozen ground was of no great matter. We organized each side into teams, lining up in motley rows, the football in the center. Exactly what happened between the Saxons and the Scots is difficult to say. Some accounts of the game bring in elements that were actually dreamed up by a British poet by the name of Robert Graves. He was also a writer and war veteran, who reconstructed the encounter in a story published in 1962. Poets, authors, pundits, and historians would go on for years after year after year trying to break down exactly what inspired the truce of World War I. Of course, not every man on either side was thrilled by the truce, and one official opposition squelched at least one proposed Anglo-German soccer match. One Lieutenant C.E.M. Richards was a young officer serving in the East Lancashire Regiment, had been greatly disturbed by reports of fraternization between men of his regiment and the enemy, and he welcomed publicly the return of good old sniping late on Christmas Day. There was a lot of resistance by those in the trenches. He did this just to make sure that the war was still on, with some officers fearing peace would break out. Yeah. In most places up and down the line, it was accepted that the truce would be purely temporary. Men returned to their trenches at dusk, in some cases summoned back by flares, but the most important part determined to preserve the peace at least until midnight. There was more singing, and in at least one spot, presents were actually exchanged. One fellow by the name of George Ede had become friends with a German artilleryman who spoke good English, and as he left, his new acquaintance sent to him, "Today we have peace. Tomorrow you fight for your country, and I will fight for mine. Good luck to you." Fighting erupted again the next day. Though there were reports from some sectors of the hostilities remaining suspended into the new year, it does not seem to have been uncommon for the resumption of the war to be marked with further displays of mutual respect between enemies. In the trenches occupied by the Royal Welch, according to a Captain Stockwell, climbed up on the parapet, fired 3 shots in the air, and put up a flag with Merry Christmas on it. At this, the opposing commander appeared on the German parapet, and both officers bowed and saluted. One then fired a shot in the air and went back to his trench. The war was on again, and there would be no further truce until the general armistice of November 1918. Perhaps close to the majority of the thousands of men that celebrated Christmas of 1914 together would not live to see the return of peace. But for those who did survive, the truce was something that would never be forgotten, and the lessons it had taught permanently, indelibly placed inside their souls, their hearts, and their psyche. And for all the things that go on in the world around us today, yet again we learn through history that we have been to so many of these challenging and painful places. I find it so interesting and curious, and even illogical to a degree, that we take so many of these seemingly inane issues that we discuss today in our modern political discourse, and then you compare it and contrast it to things like the truce of World War I think if there was more people that understood the frailties of life and the imbecilic debates and arguments that we have, not only in this nation, but in this world. Here you have two warring oppositions, two sides hell-bent on the death and destruction of the other, that finally in their maturity and their introspection come to the question of what are we fighting for anyway? And yet again, history leaves us with an enormous amount of evidence to prove that, in fact, when we rely on the better angels of our nature, amazing things can happen in the American psyche. Quick break, and I'll wrap this puppy up. You're listening to Unknown America right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. We're coming right back at you. The magazine for the American landowner is a proud supporter of the Michael Hart Show. Currently, they're offering an exclusive subscription price for listeners of the Michael Hart Show. So click on the subscribe button on landreport.com and enter the code HARTSHOW at checkout and receive a 1-year discount on America's #1 land magazine. You'll get a full year of the Land Report, which normally goes for $59, for only $15. That's a 75% savings off the cover price. Again, that's promo code HARTSHOW at checkout of thelandreport.com, and make sure to check out The Land Report on Facebook if you love land. Hey, welcome back. We're going to wrap this puppy up here, but one of my favorite things to do on Unknown America is share interesting little oddities and tidbits about the greatest nation on earth, things that you may very well did not know that you did not know. These are, of course, all contained in the book Unknown America, which is available in all fine bookstores online. You can get a copy of it by going over to theunknownamerica.com. If you go to that website, it will come to you fully autographed and with a copy of the United States Constitution. So we would love to have you pop by there, take a look at the book. It's also available on Amazon as a Kindle download. It is flying off the cyber shelves that are out there, and we would welcome just your feedback, your reviews on it as well. There is a children's version of the book coming out, as well as a board game, a Unknown America 2. That's why we're calling it the Unknown America Project, because there is just an awful lot of history in the past that people are just not aware of. And when you are aware of it, what goes on in the world around you each and every day seems to make a lot more sense. This particular broadcast is brought to you in part by Liberty One Tech. You can visit them at libertyoneTech.com and save 15% on Talk Text Plus when you mention Heart of America or Unknown America as well. I'll tell you what, they do a great job for us. They can help you out as well. Again, these folks over at Liberty One Tech has a very special discount for you. If you go over and check out the website right now, you can get the Talk Text Plus, which is a support program for you. It's access to expert technology regularly, only $20 per month. But Heart of America listeners can save 15% when you mention this program. For more information, check them out again at liberty1tech.com. Tell me you heard about it right here on Unknown America. Closing this bad boy out, some interesting things from a chapter, Unknown Americana. Did you know that 1 in 8 Americans have been employed by the fast food chain McDonald's? Here's one that probably won't surprise most of you, as we are right here in the midst of bowl season. In more than half of all U.S. states, the highest paid public employee in the state is a football coach. Yep. It costs the U.S. government 1.8 cents to mint a penny and 9.4 cents to mint a nickel. As an aspiring actor, Leonard Nimoy, yes, Spock, although it's highly illogical, did in fact work as a cabbie, once giving a ride to a future president of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. America is only one of 2 countries in the entire world, alongside New Zealand, that allows pharmaceutical companies to advertise prescription drugs directly to consumers. So all those Ambien and Zoloft commercials seem pretty odd to non-Americans. The phrase winning hands down originally referred to a jockey that won a race without whipping his horse or having to pull back on the reins. The equivalent of 100 acres of pizza are served in the United States every day of the week. And finally, by the time a child graduates from high school, listen to this, it explains a lot, as we oftentimes have conversations about the Second Amendment, gun control legislation, etc. And we'll be doing it again, by the way, this Friday's edition of the program. By the time a child graduates from high school, he has seen 40,000 murders on TV. Concerns about the impact of television violence on society have been hotly debated for years, and as early as 1952, the United States House of Representatives was holding hearings to explore the impact of television violence and concluded that television broadcast industry, and this is a quote, was a perpetrator and deliverer of violence on American children. That's it for us. We'll be back with you tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. Megan Barth will be joining us on the Thursday edition of the broadcast. Please do us a favor here, and if you've enjoyed learning about the Christmas truce and about the tree that almost sparked a war in the Koreas, please share this program. Please tell somebody about the program. We got a lot of things we're working on. We want to spread the message of the program out there and educate some folks, let them know about all the amazing things about this country and the news that's going on in the world around them today. We know that you can spend time with almost anybody getting the news of the day, but in reality, most people that even that do this for a living don't necessarily understand what they're talking about because they don't take the time like you have today to invest in learning all about some amazing things that take place right here in the United States of America. So please share the program. Let as many people know about it as you possibly can. We would be very, very, very grateful for your participation and your shares as well. You've been listening to the Unknown America right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network and the Unknown America Project right here. Y'all stick around. A lot more going on throughout the course of the week. We'll be back with you tomorrow at 8. This is Michael Hart, and you've been listening to The Unknown America. Heart of America and the Michael Hart Show is brought to you in part by the Unknown America Project. Unknown America, myths and little-known oddities about the greatest nation on earth, explores many of the falsehoods and fallacies and revisions in American history that impact the beliefs and the thoughts of many people in this country today. So if you'd like to learn some of the most enduring myths that have been perpetrated on the American public for the last 100-plus years in this country, go check out the book at heartofamerica.net. That's heartofamerica.net. And pick up a copy of Unknown America. It comes out to you absolutely no shipping, be autographed, and we'll even send you a copy of the United States Constitution as our way of saying thanks. So support the Unknown America Project by simply going to theunknownamerica.com, and thank you for your support.